We can prove that in many different ways, but the fact that it speaks from this ancient time in the 500s BC and speaks about things that won't happen for hundreds of years is quite fascinating, and we can actually show it. So we're looking at the fulfilled prophecy of Daniel. We've skipped a few of them. We skipped Daniel chapter 2, and we skipped Daniel chapter 7, which have fulfilled prophecy, but focus heavily on the end-time eschatology prophecy. And just for the sake of our study, we're cherry-picking just a few, but there are a lot more fulfilled prophecies throughout the Scriptures that we could talk about. We have talked about Psalm 22, we've talked about Isaiah 53, we've talked about the prophecy of Tyre and Ezekiel, we've talked about several of the other ones, but now we're on Daniel. And I wanted to remind everyone of this visual that we had up several weeks ago. It's the cross references in the Bible. One survey counted 63,799 cross references in the Bible. And this is why when you drill in on any one part of the Bible, you're helping yourself understand all the rest of it. This is why getting deep on a subject like Daniel is still helpful. You might say, well, what does this have to do with everything else? Trust me. Trust me. If you understand one part of the Bible better, you will help yourself understand all of it better. And so that's the reason, because there's 2,000 to 3,000 different allusions to other books, from one book to another, 400 quotations of other books, 150 direct references to other books, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's go to Daniel chapter 9 today. We talked about Daniel chapter 8 last week. And Daniel chapter 8 and Daniel chapter 11 go so hand in hand, I almost went straight to 11 and came back to 9 later. But Daniel chapter 9 relies heavily on what was said in Daniel chapter 8. So I thought we should go to Daniel chapter 9 and just, do it the way that Daniel wrote it, and God gave him the visions in that order. So we'll be getting into this. We're going to talk about mainly three verses, verse 24, 25, and 26 tonight. We're going to do some math, but I already did the math for you. I got all the answers that's going to be on the screen, so don't worry about it. If you're not a mathematician, neither am I. I know the things I need to know about math, and that's it. So we're going to do some math. We're going to talk about the 70 weeks. We're going to talk about the part of this prophecy that is very clearly and obviously already fulfilled. And verse 27 we've talked about before. That's eschatology, that's end times prophecy. And we've talked about that before. I'm sure one of these days we'll talk about it again, unless the eschaton comes sooner than we may expect, and we should be expecting it any time. But at any rate, I'm sure we'll get to that at someday, either here or in heaven. But for now, 24, 25, and 26 is our main focus, but we're going to have to do a little context. That being introduced, there is one thing I wanted to say before we dive into Daniel 9, and that is, I was really bugged for the last 2 weeks, because when we came to the end of Daniel 8, I had written something incorrectly in my notes, and it was it was actually correct, but I had tried to expand on previous notes. Whenever I go over a passage that I've gone over before, I'll bring out my old notes, and typically I will go in and try to get deeper into different subjects. Well, I've mentioned before when we've gone over Daniel 8 that those 2,300 days in verse 14 of Daniel chapter 8 will be loosely connected with a general time frame of that time when Antiochus Epiphanes was desecrating the temple until it was restored. And so I tried to go a little deeper on it 2 weeks ago, and I noticed that Menelaus, the false high priest who bribed the second high priest to bribe Antiochus, but he wasn't even a Levite. He became the high priest in 172 BC, and then it was the temple was, the Jerusalem was conquered by the Maccabees, and the temple was restored, and they sort of regained control of the temple in 164 AD. And so I said, well, that's 8 years. you ever take a few months, you might be around 7 years, and that should fit. Well, 2,300 days is not 7 years. And that's where we even were talking about it, I realized as I was teaching that I didn't finish those notes. So, yes, I did spend about a whole day of deep diving on this, and I think I have some better answers for you. So 2,300 days is 6 years and 3 months and change. So it's over 3 months, under 4 months. So 6 years and 3 to 4 months. That's 2,300 days. Now, Menelaus, we know, did become the high priest. He was not a Levite. The real high priest in Israel was deposed in 175 BC. 175, his name was Onias III. He was the high priest. He was descended from Zadok the priest, and so on and so forth. His brother bribed Antiochus. His brother's name was Jason. Bribed Antiochus to get the high priesthood and deposed his own brother. That's Jason. He was a Levite. But then that was 175 BC. It was 3 years later when Menelaus went behind Jason's back and bribed Antiochus again. And he took the high priesthood. And when he did, he wasn't the brother of Onias. And since Onias is still revered, no doubt, by many people as the real true high priest, Menelaus goes about to kill Onias. And Onias has fled. He flees to Antioch. And Menelaus sends a man to assassinate Onias. And he does do that. So Menelaus becomes the high priest about 172, but he assassinates the true high priest, Onias III, probably about 171 or 170, right in there. Now, if you're going to count 6 years and 3 to 4 months from the time, counting backwards, from the time when the temple was restored, which we know was in the 25th day of the month Kislev in 164 AD. We know that because the Maccabees were very meticulous to record that date. That's where we get the time Hanukkah. That would be in December, our December. And so that's why they celebrate Hanukkah around the time of Christmas, because it was in December when they retook the temple and consecrated the temple. If you count backwards from that, you end up in 170 AD. BC. Am I saying AD? I mean BC. We're in BC. You end up in 170 BC, and so you go back another 3 to 4 months. If we don't know exactly when Onias was killed, but it's very plausible that Onias was killed August to September of 170 BC, which would be exactly 2,300 days before the temple was consecrated and back. You could also count from when the pig was offered on the altar and the statue of Zeus was set up, which would be 167 BC. And then you could count until the war was done, which is about 160 BC. But the problem is there's still skirmishes afterwards, and when does the war exactly end? It's not. Plus, if you look at Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, it says that, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary be cleansed. So it's not about the war ending, it's about the sanctuary being cleansed. So that really gives us 164 BC. If you weren't here 2 weeks ago, this might be a little over your head. Just tag it on, go back and watch the video, and then you can come back and watch this video, and now that makes sense, right? Okay, so with that being said, I've shamed myself, I've clarified the error of my ways, I repent in dust and ashes. And now we can go on to Daniel chapter 9, okay? So let's look at it. Daniel chapter 9, verse 1 says, in the first year of Darius the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, and let's pause there. So this is dating the book. Darius would have been the man set up over the kingdom of Babylon by Cyrus when Cyrus took the Babylonian capital, Babylon. And so Darius, the first year of Darius would also be the first year of Cyrus. So this gives us a date of 539 BC. That's what Daniel is claiming. He's claiming that he's writing in 539 BC. All right, let's look at verse 2. And it's up on your screen if you don't have your Bible, okay? I'm just helping you out tonight. All right. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolation of Jerusalem. Okay, so Daniel's been studying the book of Jeremiah, and he comes to the realization that Jeremiah said that the people of Israel would be out of the land of Israel for 70 years and then would go back. Now, Daniel's writing in 539. This is right about 70 years. It's, he's not quite there, but it's almost 70 years since the people of Israel have been taken out. Actually, the people of Israel were taken out at three different times out of Israel. And the third time, the whole country was really just destroyed. And the city was destroyed. But Daniel doesn't know which of the takings starts the 70 years. So they might already be at 70 years. It could be very soon. So at any rate, he knows it's either time or it's almost time for them to go back. And so he starts to pray about this. Now, he's praying specifically about what Jeremiah said. So let me give you a couple things that Jeremiah said. Jeremiah 25, verse 11. Jeremiah writes, "And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years." Now again, we have verification that Jeremiah was written long before the time of Persia, but he predicted exactly how long they would be gone into captivity. So again, here's great evidence for the miraculous nature of Scripture, that it's not only authentic, but it's accurate. But that's what Jeremiah said. So Daniel's reading this, okay, wow, he said it's going to be 70 years. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. "For thus saith the Lord, after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word towards you in causing you to return to this place." 70 years. Twice in the book of Jeremiah we see this. Now, Jeremiah talks about some of the reasons why they're going into the land of Canaan in the book of the land of Babylon, why they're going to be taken away. And one of the reasons he gives in Jeremiah 34, if I'm not mistaken, is that it's because they haven't kept their Sabbath. And not the Sabbath every week on Saturday, but the Sabbath every year. Let me explain this, but first I'm going to take you to 2 Chronicles 36. This is what the author of 2 Chronicles wrote about Jeremiah's prophecy. He talks about how they burnt the house of God and broke down the wall of Jerusalem. And in verse 21 it says, "To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years." Whenever you see score in the Bible, that's times 20. So 70 is 60 and 10. I know it's hard. This is one of the things that we just really need to update in our Old English Bible. I'm sorry. Why don't you just say 70, okay? 70 and 10. But okay, whatever. 70 and 10. It does make passages like Daniel 9 seem more complicated than they are. They're already complicated enough, right? But at any rate, okay, 70 and 10 years. All right, so here we go. Let's talk about the Sabbath year for a second. The Sabbath year, the Jewish years were broken into heptads. Does anyone know what a heptad is? It's a group of 7. It doesn't mean 7 years. It could be a week, it could be 7 days, it could be 7 months, it could be 7 anything. It's like a dozen, right? It's 12 of something, right? That's what a heptad is. The Jewish years are broken up into heptads. I just listed here for you 3 of them. You have Exodus 23, Leviticus 25, and Leviticus 18. Leviticus 25 in 2 places, 1 through 7 and 18 through 22. Deuteronomy 15 and Deuteronomy 31 talk about the Sabbath year. Essentially, every 7 years, the farmers of the land were to not plant crops. And God was going to provide enough crops in all the other years so that they can take a year off of planting crops. It doesn't mean everyone doesn't work, like nobody works at all throughout the whole nation. Just the farmers. And even the farmers, they're still going to be taking care of their animals or whatever else they're doing. They're just not planting their fields every 7 years. Now, we know that this was rare for Israel to actually observe this. It was a command, again, many times throughout the Old Testament, but it was pretty rare for them to actually follow it. So every seventh year was the ending of their heptad, and it would be a Sabbath year, and the ground was not to be planted. So what Jeremiah is saying is that the reason you're going to be gone for 70 years is because for 70 heptads, for 70 groups of 7, you have not been keeping the Sabbath year. 70 heptads is, don't do the math, I got it for you, 490 years, which puts you all the way back to like the time of David and Solomon. I mean, like David, Solomon, and then nobody else kept the Sabbath year after that. Maybe even before that, the dates are a little bit sketchy. Some people have different dates for David and Solomon. But essentially, we're going back all the way back to the very beginning of the kingdom, where the kings reigned in Israel. They were not observing the Sabbath year. And Jeremiah is saying, because 490 years of not observing the Sabbath, I'm going to send you out of the land so the land has rest for 70 years to make up for the last 490. So David here then, if we were to look at, if we were to summarize, Daniel is concerned about those 70 heptads. Let's look at verses 20 through 23. Daniel 9, verse 20 through 23. In verse 3, he begins praying to God about it, and what a glorious prayer it is. I'd love to preach a whole sermon on the prayer. As a matter of fact, I have preached a whole sermon on the prayer. Go find it online. But we're going to skip it for now. We don't have that much time. Verse 20. And while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin, I just think that's interesting. Did Daniel sin? I mean, did Daniel do this? Well, I mean, he was in Israel for a few of those heptads before he got carried away captive into Babylon. He didn't make the decision not to have I mean, he wasn't a farmer. But he says it's my sin. He calls himself a sinner. He identifies with his people and the sin of his people. Confessing my sin and the sin of my people, Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God. Yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplication the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter and consider the vision. So this is the conclusion of our introduction to those 3 verses we want to study. Okay. Here's what happens in this passage. Daniel's praying about the 70 heptads of Sabbaths. That's important to keep in mind. He's praying about something he understands to be 70 groups of 7 years. And while he's praying about that, Gabriel comes with a message in response to his prayer about 70 groups of 7 years. Now, if you know the next 3 verses, you know why I'm making such an important emphasis on this, because that's how we're going to interpret the prophecy. Okay, now let's do verse 24. 70 weeks here comes the prophecy that is delivered to Daniel from the angel Gabriel. Not just an angel, the angel Gabriel, my goodness. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, look at that word, that second word there, weeks. 70 weeks. That is a Hebrew word, Shabuah. I'm 100% sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, but that's the word, okay? I think the V's are B's, so it's or the B's are V's, Shavua or something. Anyway, but what it means is a heptad. Now, when it's used connected to time, it's just translated as week, because what's the thing you usually group in 7 in time? Well, it's weeks, right? But it doesn't mean it has to be days. It's just a group of 7 something. So he says there are 70 heptads determined upon your people Israel. Okay, so this is, there it is. There's the word, Shabuah, means heptad, translated as week. It's 70 groups of 7 time measurements. That's what it is. So you can understand why the translators would translate it as week. Right? Some translations actually don't say week. They'll say sevens, 70 sevens, to help you understand that that's a word that means heptad. Okay, so we have to assume that these are years, right? First of all, because that's the context of the prayer. He's praying about 70 heptads that are now being fulfilled. They're almost done. And here comes Gabriel and says, 70 more are determined. I mean, this is obvious that he's talking about 70 groups of 7 years. That is the context. But there's another reason, okay? Turn to Daniel chapter 12, if you would. Now, in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, the verse I said we aren't going to touch on, it says it takes one of those heptads, one of those weeks, and it says, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. That's what we call the abomination of desolation. Now, all throughout the book of Revelation, there's a 3.5-year period of time that comes after the abomination of desolation. So what does that mean about that last week? Well, it's got to be more than 3.5 days, right? I mean, it's got to be more than 7 days if half of it is 3.5 years. But look at the end of Daniel. We don't have to go outside of the book of Daniel. We can look inside of the book of Daniel to find this. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, it refers to this same thing in Daniel 9, verse 27. It says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. I don't know. What's the 1,290 days versus the 1,335 days? Doesn't matter for this study. The point is that there's 1,290 days that count up to something, and then 1,335 days that count to something else. That 1,335 days has to be within the 70 weeks, and this is the last week. Let me see if I can clarify that, because I'm not sure if I said that well enough to follow. Remember, in verse 24, it says 70 weeks are determined to what? To finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy. What vision and prophecy? Well, it's got to be at least the vision and prophecies of Daniel, right? I mean, they have to all be finished in these 70 weeks. Well, the last of the weeks, the last of those heptads, has something that happens 1,335 days after it, which means it's got to be at least 1,335 days long, right? I mean, are we tracking? So it can't be 7 days. It has to be 7 years. Now, if you take 7 years and you go into year 4, you could find 1,335 days until you get to the end of the 7th year. You won't be exactly halfway. Halfway would be 1,260 days, I think. 1,335 gives you 3 years and 8.5 months, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, it's in the middle year, which is what he says, in the midst of the week, right? So that makes perfect sense. So Daniel's interpreting this for us, or Daniel isn't, but the angels are that are giving him this. So then we know then what this is. The Shabuah, the group of 7 time measurements, he's already talking about years that are grouped in 70s. And now we have also later in chapter 12, we know it can't be a week of days. So then we're talking about weeks of years. So now we have 70 weeks of 7 years each, 70 heptads of 7 years. 70 groups of 7 years. Okay. So far, so good. 70 Shabuah in Daniel 9 must be equal to 490 years. Right? We already gave you that math statistic. So it'd be 70 heptads. All right, moving right along. Now we're on to verse number 2. We're making good progress, guys. We're getting there. Okay. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 62 weeks, the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. Let's zoom in on a couple words there. 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And in this time, there's a couple things that are going to be done in these periods. It says, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. He splits it into two categories, but it's basically 69 weeks. 62, 62, just in case you're hung up on that score thing. And then 7, so that's 69 altogether into two categories. We'll talk about that in a minute. And that will lead until the Messiah comes. Okay, so now you understand why I'm picking this prophecy, because if Jesus came at the right time, this is a prophecy hundreds of years before Jesus came about when Jesus would come. So this is pretty incredible if it's accurate. So let's see if it is. I think it is. I wouldn't be a pastor if I didn't. Okay, so let's first look at this here. So Daniel 9, we can split it up into those 70 weeks. We can split them up into three categories. You've got the first 7 weeks, or seven heptads. Then you got another 62, according to Daniel 9, verse 25. And then you got one more. Okay, we're not going to talk too much about the one more because I believe that's still in the future. And yeah, I think that's pretty obviously still in the future. But at any rate, the first 69 are the ones we're going to focus in on. Okay, so you have, a command to restore and build Jerusalem is where they start. We'll talk about where that command must be, what that is. And then I think those 7 years, those 7 weeks, are going to be how long it takes to rebuild Jerusalem. In fact, Josephus said that when Nehemiah went back to rebuild Jerusalem, it took 49 years. 7 times 7, 49. Makes sense. Actually, an incredible prophecy from 539 BC, don't you think? That's not even the kicker of this one. Okay, then we're going to keep on counting another 62 weeks until the Messiah the Prince. And so we got 49 years and then 483 years by the time we add the other 62 weeks, and then we'll have 490 by the time the last week is done. That's why people talk about a 7-year tribulation, by the way, if you didn't pick up on that. Those last 7 years are we call it the 7-year tribulation, but it's never called that in the Bible. Probably the most biblical term for it is the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy, that last heptad that's not finished yet. And it's spoken about throughout the Bible, but never called the 7-year tribulation. At any rate, okay, so what we know is that there and 483 years is when the Messiah is supposed to come, and he's supposed to be executed. That's in verse 26. We'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so now let's see what we can do to count these 483 years. First, we have to remember that it's starting with some command to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. So let's look at a couple different commands. Let's first look at the command from Cyrus. This would have been 539 BC, right? Cyrus issued a command to go back, but you can see the command. It's recorded for us in the Bible. You can look at it in the book of Ezra. You can look at it in the book of 2 Chronicles. And the command of Cyrus says nothing about rebuilding the city of Jerusalem or rebuilding the streets or the walls. It's all about rebuilding the temple. That's the only thing that he commands, and that's the only thing that is done when he sends them back. So this is probably not the right command, but this is one possible command. Okay? That would have been 539. Right? Did I put it up there correctly? Yeah, 539. Okay, then you have the second command would have been by Darius. No, not Darius. Artaxerxes. Darius sort of reiterated the command of Cyrus later. Artaxerxes in 457 or 456. It's hard to be 100% dogmatic because they time these things based on how long the king has been in power. So he might be on his first year, but at the beginning of his first year, he's on one calendar year. At the end of his first year, he's on another calendar year. So depending on what part of the year, it could be one or the other. So we're narrowing it down to 2 years, 457 or 456. He did not command, he did not command, or his command did not result in the rebuilding of the city. You can see this in Ezra 7:11 through 28. So again, it was just a reiterating of the command of Cyrus to go back and to actually build the temple, because it had been put on hold, and now he's able to go back and they're able to actually rebuild. You can read about that in the book of Ezra. So they had to stop building for a while. Some people would say it's that command, but that again didn't rebuild the temple. It didn't rebuild the city, it just rebuilt the temple. And it says here that you're going to restore and build Jerusalem. And then it even says that the street and the wall will be built again, even in troublous times. So that doesn't seem to fit. The better, I think, command would be this one. Artaxerxes, again, in 445 or 444, he did decree to rebuild the city and the wall and the street of Jerusalem. When Nehemiah went, you can read this in Nehemiah chapter 1 and 2, him going to the king and getting the command to go back. And when he goes back to the city, he finds that he can't even pass through some of the streets. The streets are not rebuilt. The wall is definitely not rebuilt. So the command for Nehemiah to go back is probably the one we're talking about, especially since Josephus says that it was 49 years for them to rebuild in the time of Nehemiah. That fits really well. But we're going to count from all three of these just to show you where you would land. Okay, so now we've got to ask, by the way, it's Jesus is executed 33 AD. Some say it would be 30, so we got about a 3-year time window there. Some people would say it'd be 30, 32, 33, somewhere in those 3 or 4 years when Jesus would have been executed. Okay, so, the Jewish temple was destroyed in 70 AD. We'll get back to that. Let's see, lunar years or solar years? Okay, you're like, what are you talking about? Okay, just hang on. Okay, this isn't as complicated as it seems. But the ancient cultures used 360-day years. And after 6 years, they'd add in a leap month, and then they'd have another. Every month was 30 days. They didn't have 28 days and 29 days and 30 and 31. No, it was all 30 days. And they would have 12 months. It'd be 360 days in a year, and every 6 years, they'd throw in another month to make sure their calendar didn't get off. So the Jews definitely did this. You can see this in the book of Genesis, all throughout the Bible. They're using 360-day years. It was the Romans who started the 365 and a quarter day years that's based on the sun, so they'd be called solar years. The lunar years were based on the months because they go based on the moon. So we're going to have to look at this and say which years are used in prophecy. Well, I'll just give this to you very briefly. Revelation 12 talks about a time period of 3.5 years. Revelation 12, verse 14. Revelation 12:6 counts that time period as 1,260 days. What's that? Well, that's 360-day years, and you have 3.5 of them. And Revelation 11:2 and 13:5 counted as 42 months. So, in prophecy, especially about the weeks of Daniel, because remember, Revelation is talking about it, we're using 360-day years. So we should expect then that these are 360-day years. So then we would have to think about two different things. If this is going in 360-day years, we're talking about, when we multiply it by 483, we're going to have we're going to be off by a couple years. So you have to translate a lunar year into a solar calendar. 483 times 60 would equal 173,880 days. And then if you take 173,880 days and divide it now by the solar calendar, 365 and a quarter, you'd come out to 476 years and 21 days. Okay, so if God is giving us years that are 360 days and counting it by the day, rather than counting each year with a leap year added in on every 6 years. If he's counting it by the day, this is what it's going to be. It's going to be 476 years and 21 days. And that does seem to be the case about the last 7 of these heptads, if you look at the book of Revelation. So we should probably expect that that's what's going on here. And I think we should. But I'm going to count them both ways, okay? So let's look at both of these, all 3 of the different commands, and we'll just give you a visual representation. If you're going from Cyrus and you end up with, you go with the lunar calendar, 476 days. 476 years, you're going to end up in 63 BC. Nothing happened in 63 BC, okay, except the Romans came and took over Israel again. And if you go by the solar calendar, you're 56 BC. Nothing happened. Okay, that's definitely not it. Plus, we know that Cyrus's command wasn't to rebuild Jerusalem, so we're not going to go with that. Let's go with the next one. We're going to put an X on that, okay? Here, we have, if we go by the lunar calendar, and we go from the first command of Artaxerxes in 457, 456, we end up in 20 AD, 19 or 20 AD for the lunar calendar, and the solar calendar puts us in 27 AD, 26, 27. Now this, if you're going to say that it's by the solar calendar, then you probably just think Jesus started his ministry a little earlier than most people think. Most people think he started in 30 AD, maybe he started in 27. Perfectly reasonable to think he might have started in 27 and was crucified in 30. That's a real theory that some people have. Certainly possible that Jesus did that, and then you can satisfy your solar calendar theory. But I don't really think that command fits very well. So I prefer so I put a question mark on that one. It's fine if that's where you come to the conclusion, but I don't think that's probably correct. I think since Revelation is counting these in solar and lunar years, we've got to count in lunar years. We've got to count the days. And so if you count the days from the command in 444, the second command of Artaxerxes, which is when Nehemiah went back and rebuilt the temple for 49 years, guess what you come to? 32 or 33 AD. In fact, they've counted out those extra 21 days, and we actually know within a couple days the day that the decree was issued from Artaxerxes. And it comes down to, there's some debate on this, but it comes basically down to the week of the Passion Week. Some people say it comes down to the exact day that Jesus entered Jerusalem and claimed to be the Messiah. Others say it comes down to his crucifixion or one of the other days in between. But it's super close, okay? It's right there. It's exactly where you want it to be. So no matter how you count this, you get from a command to restore and build Jerusalem to exactly the time frame when Jesus was around. And now look at this. If you go with the solar from there, you're a little late. You're 38 AD. Nothing really happens there. 37, 38. Now, so you've got two possibilities here that work pretty well, whether you're going with the solar or lunar. Although I think that second command of Artaxerxes is better. Do you like all my I spent a lot of time on all this artwork. I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, I'm just patting myself on the back. I'm learning about all this PowerPoint stuff. Okay, really quick, we'll do 26, we'll be out. After 62 weeks, it says, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. So in that time period, at the end of it, the Messiah is going to die. Who's going to predict this in 530s AD, 539 AD? Nobody's going to predict this. But the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So I'm not going to get deep into this, but when it says the people of the prince, Daniel chapter 7 tells us who he's talking about. It's a prince who's going to make war against the saints, and he's reigning in the Roman Empire. Okay? So check that out, Daniel chapter 7. You can see that. Now, Daniel chapter 9 then is giving us a couple things that are going to happen. In 483 years after the command, whether it's solar or lunar, you're going to have the Messiah show up after the command to rebuild Jerusalem. He's not just going to show up, he's going to be killed. He's going to be killed unjustly. It says that he'll die, but not for himself. That's pretty amazing prophecy. But that goes along with other prophecies we had seen. Psalm 22 talks about the Messiah dying. Isaiah 53 talks about the Messiah dying. Daniel's now predicting it from an angel. Here's the kicker. After the Messiah dies, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed again, and he's going to be destroyed not by the Antichrist, but by the people of the Antichrist, because the Antichrist will come later after the city is destroyed. Now, is Daniel concocting this? Why doesn't he concoct the rest of the story? We're not told the rest of the story until later. Like, we don't even get the rest of what's going to happen until really Matthew, Jesus and the Olivet Discourse, and Revelation, and we start getting more of this answer. How does this work? Daniel, if he's making this stuff up, is just making up the complete nonsense. It makes no sense. So this prince is coming, and he's going to war against the saints. But before he comes to war against the saints and commit an abomination of desolation in the temple, his people are going to destroy the temple. Yes, but not him. His people are. How does that work? Well, we know how it works, because 37 years after Jesus died and rose from the dead in 33 AD, the Romans came and destroyed the city of Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. And for almost 2,000 years, until 1948, there was no city of Jerusalem. There still is no temple. This is why we know that sometime between now and the abomination of desolation, whenever that happens, there has to be another temple built. That has to happen, because otherwise you can't finish this prophecy. The prince who comes is supposed to go into the temple and commit an abomination like the one done in chapter 8 that we talked about 2 weeks ago. And so here's the prophecy. It's an amazing prophecy, and just those 3 verses tell us amazingly specific things, that the Messiah is going to come exactly at a certain period of time, and then the people of the Romans will destroy the city, but sometime later, the Antichrist comes, who's going to be a Roman as well. We haven't gotten to that part yet, so that's still future prophecy. But that limits our time frame. No matter how you interpret this, the Messiah has to come sometime in the early 1st century before the temple's destroyed. Has to happen, because after he comes, and he's going to come and he's going to be cut off, but not for himself, then the city's destroyed. That happened, so the Messiah has to have already come. This is what the Babylonian Talmud, the Jewish teachings are about counting the days. Blasted be the bones of those who calculate the end, for they would say, since the predetermined time has arrived and yet the Messiah has not come, he will never come. Oh, the predetermined time has come and the Messiah hasn't come, so just stop looking. Now, blasted be the bones. For a Jewish person, if your bones are blasted, they believe you can't participate in the resurrection. So what they're saying is you are accursed and not going to ever be resurrected if you try to count out those days. Don't do what we just did here and count out the days. Why? Because you have to have, it's Jesus. There's no one else who could be the Messiah. He's the only one who's anywhere near the time frame, and in fact, he's to the day, on the dot, the exact prediction of Daniel almost 500 years earlier, 483 years. And by the way, Daniel was more than 500 years, actually, when he was predicting it, and his start time was 483 years before it happened. This is an incredible prophecy, but it is not the most incredible of Daniel's prophecies. We'll get to that in a couple weeks when we get to Daniel 11. Any questions on Daniel 9? Besides, can we please not go so light next time? No questions? Okay, we covered it all, or we just got you really confused, one or the other. All right, let's pray, and we'll go our separate ways. Our Father, we thank you again for the amazing fulfillment of prophecy, for your amazing power that you put on display. You know all things from beginning to end. You know the end from the beginning. And you often like to show us that. You don't have to prove yourself, but you enjoy giving us evidence. You don't expect us to believe without evidence. You've given us so much evidence to place our faith in. And we thank you for this. We thank you that we can go into faith in Christ and faith in the Bible with our eyes wide open, and help us, because of the evidence, because of the truth that we found here, to be more and more faithful, more and more filled with fidelity to your word and to your commandments. And we pray all of these things in your precious name. Amen.